Greetings and welcome to this international seminar on terrorism and advanced technologies in psychological warfare organized by Tillotoma Foundation. I'm Soham Das, Director of Tillotoma Foundation. Tillotoma Foundation works globally in the areas of international relations, financial, environmental, scientific, strategic, and defense policy. In this international seminar, today we have with us Dr. Daria Bazakina, Dr. Evgeny Pashantsev, Dr. Marius Vasarelu, Dr. Davud Zandi, and of course, Dr. Gregory Simons. Let me hand over the session now to Dr. Gregory Simons, Visiting Senior Fellow, Public Diplomacy, Tillotoma Foundation. Over to you, Doctor.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. This particular seminar today is based on a book which was published last year on the title and subject of what this talk is about today. Now, this was a collaboration by a number of scholars from different parts of the world. And the idea was to bring up the issue of social and political change, the influence of technology and social media, and how it is affected in terms of weaknesses and threats created by terrorism in modern society. And the idea was to go beyond the traditional Western-centric focus by bringing in different views from scholars beyond the Western world and also young scholars. So to give different, fresh perspectives on a problem which has been around for some time and which is developing. And so each of us will be speaking about our contribution. Evgeny Pashantsev and Daria Bazakina and I were the editors, but also chapter authors of this book. And Davud and hopefully Marius, who hopefully is on his way, are chapter authors. So they will give the view about their perspective from their particular chapter topic. And each speaker gets around 10 to 12 minutes to talk about the central themes. And in the end, I will have the opportunity to draw together some common conclusions and findings from this seminar. And before I give the conclusion, there'll be an interactive discussion between the authors. And of course, we welcome any comments or questions from listeners. If you can put them into chat, if you address it to everyone, this is fine. Or state if you wish to address your question or comment to one of the particular speakers. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Daria, who was the corresponding editor of this volume, and then we'll go to Evgeny and then Davud, and hopefully Marius will join us soon. So Daria, please.
Thank you so much, dear colleagues, for the invitation to take part in today's event. It's a great honor for me, and I was very glad to take part in the preparation of this book, to meet new colleagues, to study new perspectives, and it was very interesting experience for me to work on the book, which includes the perspectives on the advanced technologies in many areas, including from psychological technologies, philosophical aspect to artificial intelligence, and combination of traditional and non-traditional propaganda. We try to unite these new threads under the book cover, and I'm very grateful to my colleagues Greg and Evgeny for the invitation. And I would like to say thank you so much for all to all the contributors. Davut, it was very interesting to learn the philosophical aspect of the contemporary terrorist problem in today's world. It was very useful for me to look on the so-called traditional problems in non-traditional on non-traditional angle. Personally, my chapter was dedicated to the contemporary propagandist, terrorist propagandist publications, which included even the attempts of sci-fi based on the view on today's technologies of artificial intelligence, and my chapter was mainly dedicated to the example of journal Cybernetic. It united the traditional propagandist content, intelligence content, which terrorists use to cryptography publications, and pure propagandistic chapters dedicated to sci-fi. And I searched that there are new examples of the propaganda addressed to principally new target audience, youngsters, mainly youngsters who are involved in game modders community, who are familiar with today's even simpler artificial intelligence technologies, and is this case of new sci-fi propaganda oriented to the contemporary youth. It's very very sensitive problem for us lecturers, teachers, researchers. Sensitive problem is to protect our students, for example, from this kind of message. This message adapts to the expectation of contemporary use, and of course the research community, as well as special services, wide law enforcement agencies, should adapt their counter messages to protect the youngsters from the recruiting to terrorist organizations on a new basis. I would like to answer your questions if you have them, and I think Dixie, it's better to proceed with discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daria. Now, Evgeny, your particular role, views, and contribution to the book, please.
Thanks, Greg. So it's a very good chance to present our joint point of view. The researchers express this from 11 countries, from 4 continents on this very important topic. And also very grateful to the researchers from 8 countries who gave the endorsements to our book. Nova Science publishers, first of all, to my mind, because it's a very good publisher, the New York publisher, and the circulation of this book, as far as I know, is going not so bad. So it's only at the same time this book is a beginning, and we hope to continue our collaboration in this very important area. By joint efforts, we can go forward. So, my chapter contribution is devoted to the topic of the malicious role of artificial intelligence in the strategic psychological warfare. This dimension, to my mind, is very important. Why is it so? All that glistens isn't gold, but it is gold if you are speaking about the role of artificial intelligence. And it is gold not only for us, for the human being, but for bad guys like terrorists who do all possible to use different new technologies in the symmetric warfare. Logically, it is very understandable because terrorists, of course, their capacities are much smaller than the capacities of the states, especially of bigger states. And in the symmetric warfare, the weaker side needs to use some new instruments, tools to counteract the more powerful side, like a state, this or that one. And artificial intelligence, to my mind, from this point of view, it's a pity, but it is true, more and more true, is a very dangerous tool in the hands of terrorists. So, why is it so? Because in strategic psychological warfare, if you are speaking about strategic psychological warfare, we are speaking about the war with long-term goals, and it is about the most important sides of social, political, economic life. If it is a strategic psychological warfare, terrorists usually, and finally, they want to destroy the current order and to introduce something else. They declare about this in an open way, and we saw what they wanted to establish, for example, in Syria, in Iraq recently. For us, it's a disaster for the mankind. For them, it's some kind of an ideal. And to promote this ideal, they use different artificial intelligence tools. I can say, as in my chapter I try to prove this, that artificial intelligence gave, first of all, gives a new level of penetration in the consciousness of target audiences. And it is from the point of view, first of all, from the physical point of view of velocity. How many comments, stories you can send? Different roles which are being used by different states under the current very dynamic and very serious international situations. They use trolls, for example, but ideally these trolls, they can produce 1,000 or much less, a teeny part what can produce only one artificial intelligent agent. It is very important. The volume of the media production. The Americans, they consider that now these 2/3 of all messages circulating on the internet, they are produced by different bots, etc. And in 25, according to different data, only 5–10% will be produced by human beings. So it's very important to understand the volume, the velocity, because artificial intelligence can produce these messages very quickly. Next, because the researchers in artificial intelligence work with emotional artificial intelligence, they are ready to introduce, not only not for the first time in the interest of the war, but in the interest of doing positive things for human beings. For example, in the hospitals, artificial intelligence needs to give service, for example, for disabled person. For that, it's necessary to understand this person, his or her emotions. It's very important. But understanding of emotions makes this artificial intelligence being hacked or being consciously produced for the aims of psychological warfare to have a very serious impact upon target audiences. Just now, it's very important factor. It's emotional artificial intelligence, which is in progress now. Sentiment analysis, for example, it makes it possible now to prepare stories where the target audiences, the readers, can say whether it is being written by a human being or it is being written by a machine. It is only a weak artificial narrow intelligence any. But Elon Musk, only several months ago, he reproduced the point of view of rather many researchers that strong artificial intelligence will come very quickly. And Musk just now says that it can be here within 5 years. And strong artificial intelligence, it's a new kind of potential threat, not by itself, but also with the help of bad guys like terrorists, not only terrorists, of course. So next, the terrorists can use, for example, the predictive analytics from the point of view to predict the events. Predictive policing is the good side of this business, how to stop terrorists. But terrorists by themselves, they also can use predictive analytics to produce predictive weapons or prognostic weapons, which can make people to make things they really don't want to do, and to understand what things will appear, for example, within 1 month, 2 months, concrete events. So it's a new quality of predictive analytics, which makes possible to influence events. And from this point of view, artificial intelligence can be a good instrument to weaponize the whole system of public administration. So the basis for this, not only in the technologies, but in the people themselves. While it is very difficult to imagine the situation when strategic arsenal of the USA or Russia will be captured by terrorists, even one rocket through 40 years, it didn't happen. But to capture programs, software, with the help of this or that group of talented computer makers, it's not a difficult thing. Practically, we have a very short period when the advantages in the development of artificial intelligence makes it possible with time, after accumulation of these experiments, not only by the majority of people, specialists, good people, but also by bad guys, we sooner or later not see only episodical deepfakes or news management in the interest of some terrorist or criminal groups, but we can see the synthetic products made with the help of artificial intelligence, which can influence the consciousness of target audiences in such manner which makes these people under the direct control of this or that group if the conditions will favor such a situation. And it's not only words, because the current situation is a transitive society, all the globe in transition. And this transition is characterized by very hot social, political, economic conflicts between states. And terrorists may use this chance, also with the help of some business, political structures which are being corrupted or wants to establish reaction regimes, etc., etc. The governments are not ideal. So in this case, we see the combination of political, geopolitical, social factors, the rise of artificial intelligence make a question, and it is no question for this, the loss of jobs, places. That's why many people can be manipulated also with the help of artificial intelligence, like a threat in the hands of terrorist groups. So how to stop these threats? Counteraction to this malicious use of artificial intelligence is possible through traditional forms of activities of the society, through traditional informational policies. But artificial intelligence can play a real role in this counteraction as well. And I have no time to go in details, but it is also a problem. The researchers now, specialists in artificial intelligence, they give a lot of examples how we can use artificial intelligence in our hands, in good hands, to stop artificial intelligence in bad hands. But it makes possible the situation not in a future of 20, 30 years, but within 5, 10 years, then the decision making in this battle between artificial intelligence tools in the hands of bad guys and artificial intelligence tools in the hands of good guys will be not practically controlled by human beings because the speed, the volume, the complexity of counteraction between artificial intelligence of different size will be so quick and complicated that for human beings, practically it will be very difficult to control these battlefields, future battlefields, for human beings, but without human beings. This is a problem. So to solve this problem, we organized a group of researchers which study the problems of malicious use of artificial intelligence. Now, more than 12 researchers from 6 countries. We do our work and very soon hope to produce a big book on the malicious use of artificial intelligence and the national psychological security. For mankind, to my mind, this problem is very important, malicious use of artificial intelligence and international psychological security, because it is for the defense of the human being, for independent position, for independent decision making. We have a lot of problems. The mankind has a lot of problems. To solve them, we need the real picture of what is going on. And malicious use of artificial intelligence, the main threat is the liquidation of this opportunity for independent human decision making. This is very dangerous. So to counteract to this threat, we need to unite intellectual capacities, practical capacities to defend the democratic alternative of the human development. Thanks.
Thank you, Evgeny. So now we move to the next speaker, which shall be Davud. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Greg, and it is nice to see you via this channel. I'd like to thank, first of all, to thank the Tillotoma Foundation for holding the seminar on terrorism and advanced technologies in psychological warfare on behalf of the book with the same topic published in the last year, 2020, by the Nova Science publisher. And also it is my pleasure to be here to address on the book with my colleagues. The book is, it is an honor to be as a contributor, is try to carry out the research on the ongoing situation. Seems that terrorism getting grew constantly. Undoubtedly, the new technology facilitated the situation in which the weaker and the non-governmental forces could be having an active role in international relations. The book addressed some positive effect of new technologies for the world we live in, but its endeavor to do a duty as to worry about the unpleasant utilizing the terrorist groups in order to achieve its illegitimate intention indeed. To be preparedness of this situation would be made of help to copy with the new emerging threats by which the proper context for the psychological warfare sets the new technologies. I wish it did well the duty. Let me go beyond the books and explain the situation we face on here. Beyond, there are some important issues, which is precious to mention on still. First, the witness shows that terrorism getting the main priority nowadays, so that the national security documents of the USA and Britain in 2018 allocated to this issue. Therefore, the first question is that terrorism is the cause of new technologies or the effect of it. The clear answering seems not to be sounding, because at the first sight, the new tech just sets a context to come out it that laid aside for decades. The new technology, even though strive to do it, otherwise it doesn't flourish such it is. Second, to be priority of terrorism, it would be means that the conflict among nations goes up rapidly. Why the difference between the human being getting worse and lead to the conflict and also violence, unfortunately? That means the new technology didn't succeed in getting better our consciousness raising of the world. Is it clear? Third, the new technologies make a virtual world for us. It blurred between the reality and illusion in the post-truth situation. It may be expected that would be made transparency, accountability, as well as the patient of a saint. Why it doesn't appear? Instead, the competition, be it on interest, status, or identity, getting worse and reach a conflictual manner nowadays. Fourth, the new technologies increase the pattern of interdependencies, frame our perceptions of the world, made our living like now we are discussing via the application, media hyper. If be so, it may Homo sapiens of us. If it is, why the difference in the way of life getting to weaponization of our culture? Why it make of us a little sense of the world? So far, I try to explain why the book is focused on the issue. In a sense, it raises a burning question which would be preferred for us, the world we live in by the media, in which made a huge information, thereby it leaves it to chance to consider on them as it necessitated. Or the ancient word of Gangaya, Arshastra, Plato's polity, Santizo's art of war, as well as the Zoroastrian Avesta, in which there is no huge amount of information. But now we look up to them by the wise way of thinking. Consequently, it needs to fulfilling an improved performance. In doing so, we need to have a common vision on a situation would become after the human being to hurt in advance. Two, the new technology would be go on to tackle the psychological warfare by which it could be carried out by the terrorist engagement. Number three, it would be taken care of terrorist entrapments. It is an easy accessible for them to represent the world with compelling story is that restoring forces performance to be accepted to prevailing. Number four, copy with terrorism, it needs two multi-dimensional initiative in which the military one may be an urgent one, but it is an inadequate one because we need to keep the eyes on the cultural oriented version of technology rather than engineering one. Number five, it does carry the burden of states of not utilizing the new technologies in their pros and cons, so that it will be lack of capacity in order to concluding they all living in that territory. Otherwise, it make a pretext to change the situation. Number six, journalists, academics, as well as the think tanks should be exercise responsibility to improve the situation according to peace, prosperity, and development, and shoulder responsibility to tell the truth in spite of all unpleasant may be resulting. Let me to conclude. I like to say my word. It is just by focus on human security, sustainable development, and good governance could be succeeding in coming over the troubled way of life in advance. I think that is all the book for doing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Davud. And now for the final speaker before we go into a general discussion, Marius, the floor is yours. So welcome.
Thank you very much, dear Greg. It's a pleasure to see you all and to learn from yourself, from your ideas. This time, for example, I had the privilege to be the last speaker, and I was looking a bit again to our book. The last mention of the book was something between from 22nd of January 2020, when this kind of global crisis was not in force, not in the level as we know. So our book was a very interesting book, but it was somehow a book of former times, because if we are talking about terrorism and terrorist threat in the next years, we must reboot somehow our ideas, our concepts, because now we are a bit much closer to the bioterrorism threat and less by traditional kind of terrorism. Just when, if we remember, for example, Donald Trump's strategy was not focused for terrorism, for example, national defense strategy, but it was much more oriented to economics, competitiveness, and fair concurrence. So, you know, we are now we are close to in two big countries. Yeah, we are now in the situation of leader changing. For example, Joe Biden is now in the United States. It's a new president, so for sure he will come with a new national strategy of security. It means he will advance new concept of terrorism, but also this year we know it's the last time of Frau Angela Merkel in Germany, and Germany is an important country in many positions in Europe, and not just in Europe. So for sure, a new prime minister, a new chancellor means in fact a new kind of strategy. Of course, it will be something to develop, but this kind of develops will start from this year. So in this kind of context, we are talking about terrorism, but we are talking about terrorism with the previous experience, because we are young and we didn't, of course, we didn't met the former pandemic of 1919, 1920. So we have a different experience. Just imagine, for example, this kind of pandemic 20 years ago, just with mobile phones, but not with internet. We are professors in university. Can you imagine how kind of classes we could have? So in this paradigm of terrorism in the next years, speaking also about the book, I believe it will be a time for a new edition of this book, a new kind of book, and we will be much more interested in psychological dimension, because the main consequence of the year 2020 was not the biological threat, but it was the mental pressure above every person. I look to the streets when I walk in Bucharest, and I see people speaking alone. And this process is developing every month. Of course, it's not in the huge dimension, but if you notice a bit, you see this kind of people, and you see they don't have earphones or something, yeah, to speak on telephone. No, they are speaking, and you see on their faces and their eyes a kind of light which was not a few years ago. And it's not a light of something, an empty light or something like this. So terrorism now is a part of menace, of threat against human mind, but it will not be the first menace. Now, unfortunately, and you know very well, I'm a lawyer and I'm a specialist in public law. In my opinion, now the main terrorist attack, if we can consider terrorist attack, is the bad governance, because in this kind of crisis time, all the lack of governance affect people, affect their mind, and affecting their mind, in fact, means to stop them to recover to a normal situation. So I propose, yeah, to have a new edition of our book, and I believe after your intervention, my intervention should be stopped here, and I'll be very able to answer to any kind of questions from any direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Marius. Okay, so we got the basic contributions from everyone so far. my chapter, which I haven't discussed, was involving the issue of the cognitive and psychological dimension of, on the one hand, this gradual isolation and this evolution of liberal democracy in terms of alienating different people or different sections of society, and how this contributed to terrorist organizations being able to use a positive form of messaging by offering these isolated individuals and groups, these ones who have been marginalized by such things as neoliberalism, austerity, this loss of identity and function in society, and how they have been targeted by terrorist groups, especially using means as social media to get in touch with them. And certainly, if we look at it, they've been remarkably effective. Looking at the superficial contradictions or apparent contradictions which have occurred, as if we look back to the Syrian conflict, the first person to commit an act of suicide terrorism in Syria was a person of white descent, Caucasian, from the American Midwest. And one can see this person died as a jihadist, a martyr in a foreign land. And you got these different identity problems which come forth. And this is one of those problems. In the United States, the Midwest are part of the so-called flyover states. That is, those states that have been forgotten by economic progress, etc., etc. These have been marginalized. And also one can have a look at the contribution of Western-led foreign policy, and especially this so-called global war on terrorism, which has been going since officially since September 2001. Within 13 years, if we take the September 11 attacks as 0.0, so this is the base, by 2014, in spite of this so-called global war against terrorism, worldwide terrorism was found to have increased 6,500%. And this is largely fueled by short-sighted and very unproductive foreign policy of regime change and so forth by Western-led countries. So you're getting terrorism in places where it didn't previously exist. And this is part of the problem shaping this binary world in the mainstream media and in social media between good and bad. These binary things do not work. If you can have someone from the Midwest dying as a martyr for a terrorist organization in Syria, it shows you these powerful dimensions, psychological dimensions, which are brought forth in this book, and the lack of cultural and cognitive awareness of what our actions are doing to contribute to this, rather than trying to prevent it. So, I mean, what, according to your own perspectives, I will ask all of the speakers in turn, beginning with Daria, then Evgeny, then Davud, then Marius. What is, in your opinion, the single worst contributing factor to this issue of terrorism from the perspective of how the West manages its foreign and domestic policy?
Okay, so thanks. It's a very, very important question. The crisis is evident. There are more crises in the world, not only in the West, because to be compared with 2008, 9, this crisis is also very serious in the countries, African countries, Asian countries. For example, the fall of the economy in different countries of Africa is, in Latin America especially, is very big, and the misery is great. But of course, the reaction of the West to this crisis, for example, this war of vaccines, the attack against the Russian vaccine, for example, of course, these global contradictions, together with the fall of the standards of life, and what Marius said, absolutely true, isolation of people, no light in their eyes. They are pessimistic because they see no help coming from above, sincere help sometimes. They're very disappointed. And when slogans for cooperation, they're everywhere coming from above. But you remember, for example, the lack of vaccines in the European Union in the very beginning. It was a conflict between Italy, for example, and other countries without vaccines in the very beginning of this pandemic. This crisis is now going on, for example, why? For the conflict between Britain and the European Union, also on the vaccines. It's a moral crisis. And each moral, psychological crisis, I'm not speaking about the economy, it's evident, it's a chance for terrorists to use this conflict in their interests. And together with new technologies, in my case, artificial intelligence, but not only, it's quantum computers, and many other new technologies, they give a chance to penetrate in the consciousness in more efficient way under the crisis conditions. And of course, the most developed countries, the USA, first of all, they are responsible for such situation. The leader in pandemic is the United States of America. And China is the leader in the fight against the pandemic. It's an objective factor. They stopped this epidemic very quickly in their own country. The same Vietnam, the same Cuba, and we have to ask, why is it so? So let's say the authoritarian regimes, they produce this epic. But for human beings, if the country fights successfully against the illnesses and prevents the murder of millions, is it bad or good? It is good. So this paradox is the country which is responsible for the most greatest number of murders as a result of pandemic, ask all the rest countries to be responsible for this, and first of all China, which is the most successful in the fight against the pandemic. Terrorists may use this, and new technologies may help them. And who produce new technologies, advanced technologies? The most developed countries. If they can't control the pandemic, the question is, can the West control these new types of arms, which can be tomorrow or just now appear in the hands of terrorists? So the terrorists appear potentially as a more mighty force in this atmosphere of pessimism and distrust. In those, the leaders of the world, financiers, they speak just now about the crisis. First of all, the question number one was in Davos, the lack of trust in the governments. Who speak about them? For example, Merkel or the rest leaders. They speak about this in an open way. But where are the changes? More trust. You need to solve the social problems. What is the result of pandemic? It's evident. The number of billionaires increased. The gap between the richest 2,000 billionaires and the vast majority of people increased greatly during the pandemic, when more than 200 million of people lost their jobs. Billions, they lost the opportunities to live better. And what about these 2,000? That is better. So this is the social main contradiction produced, first of all, by the West, not only by the West. We do not forget about the bad guys in all the rest countries, but the West proclaims to be a leader, moral leader. If it proclaims, it makes it more responsible for the words. And the people who see this gap between words and deeds, it's a strategic communication, they sooner or later will attack these regimes which do not produce democracy, which only speak about democracy, first of all. This is the main problem. That's why BRICS, other countries, I can say the alternative from the point of view, we, Russia, and India, ideal ones, which are better now. But we do not produce phrases to all the world that we are better than the rest. We are equal with problems. We are equal with social disorder, with problems of ethical dimension. If we solve these problems by joint forces and not saying this side is bad, is something like of the second role, no, all of us are equal because we have bad sides. We have not good social systems and political systems. They play not in a good way under such conditions. In this case, we can produce a very good answer, joint answer of all countries, of all the mankind to the threats, not only of pandemic, but social, economic crisis, trust, first of all, people to people, and in the governments. I suppose in this case we can stop terrorism, whether it is future one with new technologies, and we couldn't stop terrorism even with all technologies sooner or later if we do not find trust in the governments, in ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Evgeny.
Okay. I will develop a bit what Evgeny said, and I will make a parallel. Remember, before the First World War, 1910, 1912, it was something like this, a very international movement, and said there is an international of workers, international of people, and international of not fighting countries. And after assassination of Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, the World War started, and all the countries forgot their promises, their ideas, all their congress and all their meetings and all their publication and all these kind of concepts for peace. So it became when crisis started, it became very national. This kind of crisis of 2020 is a crisis who bring again nation in front of global. Now nation is the first one. For example, New Zealand with good example of COVID fighting, but other countries, for example, like Hungary or I don't know, like Serbia, with less good example of this. Yeah, so every country had its own tradition, and all these kind of countries has all their administrative mechanism. In this kind of mechanism, terrorism is part of somehow it's like a part of competition between great powers, but not between the smaller one, first. And second, it's a competition now between nations and their capacities to make alliances with big economic and technological powers. So in the same time, we can consider this year, this decade, like the beginning of new technological alliance. So if we have before 2020 much more political alliances, and after that military alliances being subordinated to political purpose, now we can say we have much more technological alliances, and political one will be subordinated to this kind of technological tool.
Okay.
Marius. Davud, did you
Yeah.
want to contribute something to this discussion?
Yeah, of course, but I didn't have my video channel from this. I can I was going to start my video because I didn't know what. Okay, you heard me, okay?
We can listen to you.
Okay, let me share my my country's experience about the COVID-19 situation, because the United States made a maximum pressure to Iran about the Iranian nuclear programs. As you know, we have a JCPOA with the world, with these 6 countries, with 6 main superpower in the world. And in spite of all Iran to be companions about the all of regulation and all verification of the IAEA about the Iran nuclear program, we have a very, very terrible situation in Iran. We didn't have any suitable drug, and also we didn't have any can take a loan from the international funds, and also we have a we didn't could to have a financial interaction between the other countries. We couldn't have any relations, and also any order, international order, and we can't to also selling the oil to the world. This is very, very important issue for our countries to say that in this situation we faced with economic terrorism. As a matter of fact, I wish by the change of the situation in the administration of the United States, the situation in the Middle East and also in the Iran and also the other parts of the country would be better and getting better. And also like to thank the Russian side because we reached a very important vaccine, Sputnik from the Russia. It is very important for our country. We are trying to use it, and we trying to controlling and tackling this pandemic in Iran. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Daria, did you have anything you wish to say?
Thank you. I would like to join the discussion with some remarks on discourse of this problem. Unfortunately, many parties, even states, prefer to communicate in frames of ideological discourse, not economical, when we are speaking about terrorism. And there are many examples of the state usage of such terms of Islamic terrorism, jihadist terrorism, etc., etc., not taking into account that, for example, for the Islamic world, the terms jihad, shahid, or mujahid are strong, have strong positive connotation, and unfortunately, searching for discourse, many states avoid the economical one, and it's a dead end. They volens nolens copy the discourse that terrorists produce, and speaking about, for example, so-called Islamic State in Islamic terminology, we produce and copy the kind of terrorist communication, and a positive decision was in Europol when approximately seven or 8 years ago they leave the term Islamic terrorists and started to use religiously inspired terrorism. But even in this term, religiously inspired, is the primate of religion. And from the point of view of true roots of terrorism, not unfortunately, from the point of view of origin of terrorism, it's wrong. And at the same time, when the official discourse of states, law enforcement agencies of supranational bodies, etc., do not produce the trust, terrorists are using it. And terrorists started to avoid many restrictions, avoid many censorship mechanisms, and in the darknet, in the encrypted apps, they proceed to not only to disseminate the religious discourse, but to analyze and successfully the mistakes of the official state discourse. This lack of discourse, this lack of approach, joint approach, unfortunately, produces the chances to terrorists who are learning to use new forms. And On the level of strategic communication of states and supranational bodies, unfortunately, we can see the examples of the phrases, messages that, for example, Bashar Assad's government is a more dangerous regime than even so-called Islamic State, and it's a primate of political competition, and this competition does not help to join for fighting the common enemy, not only terrorism, but criminal organizations, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Daria. I remember many years ago, one of my army instructors, he used the phrase to everyone on my course, assumption is the mother of all mistakes. Well, he didn't say mistakes, he used a much more colourful word, but this is what he meant. And this is certainly evident when you see a lot of what is happening within this sphere of terrorism, counterterrorism, is occurring in the informational and cognitive realms. And this creates these perceptions and miscalculations, etc. It wasn't until the 7th of July 2005 that the United Kingdom understood that their attempts to assimilate immigrant communities in the United Kingdom have failed, when up until that point they were considered a leading country in this task. And why is this? And this is the basic problem of action and consequence and then reaction. And if we look at what the UK did prior to that, this is not looking at the foreign policy. For example, Tony Blair's going to war on false pretexts in Iraq in 2003. And this is also domestic issues. For example, this the neoliberalism and these austerity measures. The UK decided to reduce government spending. Where does government spending get reduced first? In marginalised communities. And so in these marginalised communities, government spending was reduced by taking away police stations in marginal communities, reducing healthcare in marginalised communities, and reducing schools. So all of those basic necessities in life of a marginal community, its health, its education, and its security are taken away. But this doesn't remain this, because there are consequences. And the consequences were it created a vacuum. And when a vacuum is created, something fills that vacuum, which it did. You had different organizations, shall we call them, that started to fulfill those roles. And it started to radicalize these marginal communities, which were made more vulnerable, not because of the actions of a terrorist organization, but because of the policy of their own government. Yeah. And this is something which is quite overlooked in this current time, especially when it comes to the issue of scapegoating and blame. When it's very convenient to not look at this objectively and honestly to prevent something from happening, but to subjectively assign the blame to avoid any responsibility for one's actions. And this can be certainly seen in this global war on terrorism. For those of you who are not aware, Brown University, there's a Watson Institute there which has a website, the Cost of War Project. I would highly recommend you take a look at this, because it actually lists what is the cost of the global war on terrorism. Something which is not very well publicized, and if it is, it's very selectively done. So when we look at these threats, they're not always from the enemy. These can originate from own sources. I'd like just a quick reflection and comment. And I also encourage the listeners, please, if you have a question, post it on chat. And if it's a general question, say, if it's a targeted question, say who you would like to answer the question, please. But while we're waiting for any possible questions, who would like to have another reflection on what I've just said? Evgeny?
So, yes, I can add only, I absolutely agree with what you said. And the tragic thing that we live in the world of myth. Also, I read recently a research, American researchers, they analyzed the people who took part in the so-called riots. Everybody knows the story in the Congress, the attack of the Congress. And among the rioters, as it's well known through media in the United States of America, I do not want to speak a lot, but the people there, they are far from being in the right-wing organization, according to this study. A great number of them, also the people not very poor. These people, middle-class families, the age not 20, 15, it's 30, 40 and older. They are partly business people, some of them small businesses, middle-sized businesses, middle-class families, and they go not like radicals. The situation is radicalized. And the people, somebody go after Trump, some may go after Biden. In other countries, they also go maybe after and after, but all these roads may be blind alleys if the leaders do not introduce the programs of radical social reforms which really change the system of social injustice, economic injustice, even in the developed countries. Without these programs, we see only the recombination of one part of the elite, which is fighting against the other part of the elite for the pie built during the crisis. Who eats much? Is it our interest? Once again, coming to the answer, what's the role of terrorists? They see this situation. And sometimes they also, these terrorist groups, are the hands of these or that atheistic groups being used in the geopolitical place, in the political games, to provoke the conflicts, and then to make people to go after this leader, and not in the right direction. And the second fact is very important. The self-organization of the society is much lower than 50 years ago. I read recently also the estimations. 1/3 of the members of trade unions in the 30s in the United States of America associated in trade unions. In 80s, only 20%, and now less than 10% in the United States of America, but it's not only in this country, this process is going on. Less level of self-organization of people for real political deeds to change the situation. Really, we have less chance to change the situation. This is also the factor, and being used by the terrorist groups. The more we are splintered, the more we are disorganized, all of us, society in all countries, the less we are capable to change the situation. That's why not technologies, so we, our self-organization and independent thinking based on theoretical level produced by us intellectuals, which is also not so high. The system, social system, is coming to be much more complicated than in the first half of the 20th century. But we produce the people from the level of politics to the level of public administration, executives, much less prepared to solve the problems of much more complicated, structured society. So it's a problem. Without the solution of this problem, we can't solve the problem of counteraction to terrorism, because they use these weaknesses of the current society. So thanks.
Thank you, Evgeny. I will just state before moving on to the next person to speak on this topic, there is a question posed by Matthew Simon in the chat. So if the speakers could look at that. So Davud, would you like to address the point we've been discussing so far?
Yeah, thank you. It is a very, very important question, I think. The first one is that there isn't any easy situation to copy with the terrorism, because they use the new technology as we use, as the state and the other side of a society using the new technology. And also, as Daria said, they use very popular conception in the every places, like the Middle East. We have a very good conception about the caliphate, and also about the jihad, and also about the making a new Islamic state. As you know, the colonial state, when coming from the European to the Middle East, and they disappear the old situation in the Middle East, and also collapse the empire, Ottoman Empire, at the beginning of the 20th century. It is very important to know that from at the outside of the 21st century, we reach an international securities era by the communication tools, and also advanced technology, and also by the growing the interaction between the countries. We need to trying to help the states and to resolving their problems, and also needs to going to solidarity, international solidarity between the countries, and also distancing from the popular nationalism can use by some countries, for example, by the United States. And we are trying to join cooperation to fighting against the terrorism, and also the other emerging new threats like the COVID pandemic, and also environmental threats in international relations. It is very important to know that it is possible to reach a common understanding, common perception about the new threats. That is very, very important before going to fight and copy with terrorism. We need to have a common vision, common perception about the how we could do preventing from the terrorism, and how and we didn't must calculating which part of the countries and which part of the world could be hurt from the terrorism. This is very important for all persons of all countries to know that. It is my point.
Thank you. Marius, do you have something quickly to add? And Evgeny, there's a second question which is directed specifically to you.
Okay.
Yes. So for the question of Mr. Simon, there is not a universal handbook of terrorism. Yeah, we don't have a competition who is the most perfect terrorist in the world. There are books about this. There are books to analyze the terrorist phenomenon, but they are very important to separate the tools. Because if you are, for example, from Colombia, you can have money to achieve good weapons and good other tools for this, selling cocaine or something like this. But if you are, for example, and you try to be a terrorist in Greece, you don't have money, a lot of money from drugs, but you can try to have money from, I don't know, protection tax in hotels from some islands. So if you talk about this kind of global level of terrorism, is not something unitary, and it cannot be. The tools are different because the money of every group are different in different amounts, and every state has also a different tradition to answer. For example, if you try to analyze Brazil and to analyze Tanzania, for example, or I don't know, other country, Japan or something, we will have a different tradition of the police, a different kind of financing, because all these efforts to counter terrorism means money, and means money just not just to buy a lot of surveillance equipment, but also to train your police people. So we don't have a real capacities, because also in this kind of area, for sure, a lot of states and a lot of people hide part of their tools used in this area.
Thank you. Yes, Daria. Microphone.
She's mute.
I would like to add some words to Dr. Simon question. Yes, we can find the technologies used by terrorist organizations, advanced technologies for this time, such as simple artificial intelligence tools for monitoring the internet and social media to track the potential victims. For example, attacking the Tunisian city of Bengardan, the IS fighters track the law enforcement agencies' employers with the help of artificial intelligence. It's a widespread example. For example, today the IS calls to their sympathizers and lone wolf terrorists as well to provide the attacks with drones and to donate in bitcoins, donate in encrypted financial system to avoid the banking control. And earlier it was mainly Havala systems, brokers system based on trust, and nowadays they call their recruits to use darknet technologies. And there are many applications for so-called education, and truly it's propagandistic application even for children. For example, the alphabet application for mobile phones that teaches children alphabet on examples of Arabic words. B is for Arabic word meant rocket. Other letter is for word meaning missile, many kinds of weapon. Children using its application will be familiar with many kinds of weapons in theory, and in practice we can expect that some of them would like to address to the Caliphate's cubes experience. Caliphate's cubes were taught in the special camps on the Islamic State's territory, and many so-called educational apps provided by the Islamic State, etc., can be the prologue to more violent hostile practice. How to manage these problems? Firstly, I would like to join all the colleagues who stressed the importance of the trust between people to reach the goal, to solve the social problems, economical problems, and to increase the trust. Its primary goal. Technical technical methods, maybe the recruiting the specialists in new technologies and advanced technologies for the informational warfare goals on the side of the good guys. Bad guys are already addressing to the examples of neuro interfaces. They draw the pictures of anti-utopia based on monitoring technologies, drones, etc., cyberization, and maybe some involvement of the specialists of the computer science, neuroscience, to the information warfare on the side of light can help. And secondly, there is a problem of monitoring capacities. For example, monitoring of the darknet sphere to prevent and to answer to the propagandist content of the new formation. That's the main points of countermeasures from my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Daria. Now, Evgeny, you have two questions there. One, if you wish to address the first, and of course the second question is addressed specifically to you.
Thanks, Greg. So I start with the second one from Karishna. So I see this question is rather important. Yes, I can say it's possible to counteract not only to terrorists but bad guys with defensive psychological measures using artificial intelligence, sometimes not using artificial intelligence. Yes, I agree with what you read. It's a good example, but a lot of such examples we can find. But the problem is, once again, I want to repeat, maybe you do not want to pay attention to this. This is possible only when the social and political system is progressive. I only repeat, for example, everybody here, to make my statement more clear. For example, could you imagine in 30s if it was possible to introduce artificial intelligence with all these capacities? And for example, you read in the newspaper, the police in Hamburg in 1940, under the Nazi regime, used artificial intelligence to stop criminals. Their psychological attacks. Is it possible to stop criminals in 1940 in Nazi Germany? Maybe it could stop some criminals, but this technology could be used in broader sense to defend the Nazi ideology, to defend the wars conducted by Hitler, etc. You understand this? That's why if we are listening to the American senators, Republicans or Democrats, and not only in the United States of America, speaking about the decline of the democracy, of the institutions, of the trust, what does it mean? It means that the system is going from bad to worse. It's not a Nazi Germany for now. But if this process continues, we'll see that any kind of the technology being used locally to defend the people against this or that criminal or terrorist group, in broader sense, will be used against people. And it is now is going on. That's why the task is not seeking only the technological answers. The more answers we find in the sphere of technology without changing the social system, the more instruments, tools to control the people against the objective interests we'll see. This is the rule. That's why the more we want to defend the society using artificial intelligence, the more we have to have a society more progressive, with progressive backgrounds and with people who are really can defend themselves, really consciences with good education, etc., etc. Without the main instrument of the defense of the democracy, the human being, you can defend democracy using artificial intelligence. So this is a very simple answer to this question. What about the first question? I only can add, and I agree with Marius, for example, that the resources of different terrorist organizations, of course, are quite different. The level of their technical capabilities, financial capabilities, is also different. And the police, Europol, and other institutions, they know the capabilities of different, especially principal organizations. Of course, they know this information. And to my mind, the multi-level capabilities of different terrorist organizations, we, for example, can have a scheme of these capabilities and multi-level counteraction capabilities. So we need to address against these organizations. If you know these organizations, of course we can do this. But in future, in the nearest future, we can see the occurrence of new type of very technological, rather small organizations, which now or 20 years ago could do nothing from the point of view of harm to the whole mankind. But with new technologies, especially prospective technologies, a small group of people with bad intentions can do much harm now and in the past to the whole mankind. This is also a real threat. So to be ready for this new level of threats is necessary to prepare for all the law enforcement agencies, for the people, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Evgeny. Well, we've run out of time now, essentially, so it's a matter of wrapping things up. If there are any more final last-minute questions while I'm wrapping up, please do put them in the chat. But what we have had here is quite a comprehensive overview, not only of the book, which came out last year, but also a look into the current and future challenges which the world can face, given the new environmental conditions posed by such things as the coronavirus and other such issues which complicate further an already complicated equation, which is a result of a multitude of different strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats posed by technology, posed by politics, economy, government policy, terrorist approach to communication and action, self-deception, other different things. We've seen that it's sometimes the strengths and opportunities presented to a terrorist organization or capacity is a home goal. It's created by the agencies and the institutions that are meant to be fighting them. And so that this requires careful consideration. And once more, this basic thought, actions, consequences, and reactions. What are these going to be if this is done? Sometimes this is not thought. I mean, probably it wasn't considered in 2001, the declaration of the global war on terrorism in response to 9/11 would result 13 years later in a 6,500% increase. So things need to be done much smarter, with much more vision and care than they're currently done. Because at times, those that are opposing modern society in its various forms are using those instruments of communication and relationship building, which are done by the state, but creating and done in ways that create these weaknesses which can be exploited, and these weaknesses then turned into a threat. So I hope you found this seminar to be stimulating, interesting, learn something new, not only from a very Western-centric perspective, but perspectives from Romania, from Russia, from Iran, something further to dwell upon. I'd like to thank all of the speakers for their wonderful contributions. I've enjoyed moderating and listening to you. And thank you to the audience and for the questions that you posed to